Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second meeting of the Thrive Task Force. My name is Dr. Anthony Graham, and I am honored to serve as the chair of this body. This meeting is hereby called to order at 2:00 p.m. on Tuesday, June 16, 2020. I'd like to note for all in attendance that today's meeting is open to the public and will be recorded. Patillo, if you would, please call the roll.
Absolutely. Ms. Aliyah Abdul-Rahman. Ms. Abdul-Rahman. Dr. Appenfels.
I'm here, thank you.
Mr. Blackwell. Blackwell. Dr. Bracey. Dr. Bracey. Ms. Brown. Dr. Dempsey.
Present.
Dr. Dice.
Present.
Dr. Eads. Dr. Eads. Mr. Ellenwood. Dr. Evans. Representative Gayard. Representative Gayard. Ms. Gonzalez. Ms. Gonzalez. Dr. Graham.
Present.
Mr. Hall.
Present.
Representative Hawkins. Representative Hawkins. Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill. Mr. Hurtado.
Present.
Senator Johnson. Senator Johnson. Ms. Kazoo. Ms. Kazoo. Dr. Lewis.
Present.
Dr. Locklear.
Present.
Mr. Mays.
Present.
Mr. Mays.
Here.
Moore. Ms. Moore. Ms. Peacock. Ms. Peacock. Ms. Blanchard.
Present.
Mr. Prather.
Present.
Mr. Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez. Ms. Sandoval.
Present.
Mr. Stewart. Dr. Stewart. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Present.
Dr. Ray. Dr. Ray. Ms. Zegbayu. Ms. Zegbayu. Okay. We have a quorum, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Patillo. I would like to pause at this time to welcome Ms. Christy Jones, Governor Cooper's Chief of Staff, whom we are honored to have join us on the call this afternoon. Ms. Jones, we're glad to have you with us, and I open the floor to you to make any remarks you might like.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graham. I hope my voice sounds as good over this system as yours does. But thank you all for being here, being together, and collecting in this way. You know, when I thought about this, I remember at the beginning of Governor Cooper's administration and LaTanya being appointed as the governor's teacher advisor. And I remember us sitting around the good old days when we could be in one room and we were sitting around the big table in the mansion, and the governor was asking LaTanya, what can we do to help teachers? What is needed in the teaching profession? And I remember her specifically talking about the value and the need for diversity in our teaching profession and in our schools, and really teaching all of us about how important diversity is to all children and what a difference it can make in their lives and in our communities. And then she put together that amazing drive task force that you all helped to put together. I remember being in the McKimmon Center and the power and the energy and the Dr. Floods and the older teachers and the new teachers and how powerful that was. And I remember one of the young teachers saying that they had never been in the room with so many other educators who were people of color and how powerful that was. And I just remember being moved that day and really excited about how you all were going to change North Carolina and how we were going to get this done. And that was back in December. And look how much the world has changed. I think about how even now more valuable our teachers are with COVID and remote learning and realizing the inequities that are in our schools and with our kids. And then the most recent social unrest and I would say, reigniting our attention to the inequities in our societies. And when I think about that, I just realize that the work you all are doing is needed now more than ever. And so I am so grateful that you're not pausing your work, but you are pushing forward with your work because it is needed more than ever. Because really, if we're ever going to make a change in this society, I think it is going to be with our educators. I think if we really want an equitable and just world, kids need to see teachers from all races. They need to feel the love from everyone, and I think it all starts there. And I just wanted to say that I am very, very grateful for your work. Governor Cooper supports you in the work that you're doing and is working hard, and just look forward to the results. And we're always here to work together. LaTanya, thank you for your leadership on this effort, and the rest of you, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. We're so pleased to have you join us this afternoon, and we thank you for your support and your encouragement. Welcome, task force members, and thank you for joining us from across the state today via WebEx. I would also like to welcome members of the public who have also joined today's meeting. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, all task force meetings will continue to be held virtually. We have adapted our meetings to suit this format, and I thank you for your patience and cooperation as we navigate this new normal. Task force members, throughout the meeting, please be sure that you mute yourselves when you are not speaking, and remember to unmute when you are recognized by me. In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every task force member to avoid both conflicts of interest and the appearances of conflicts of interest. If any task force member has any known conflict of interest or is aware of facts that might create the appearance of such conflict with respect to any matters coming before the task force today, please identify the conflict or the facts that might create the appearance of a conflict to ensure that any inappropriate participation in that matter may be avoided. If at any time any new matter raises a conflict during the meeting, please be sure to identify it at that time. Task Force members, you were sent the minutes from the May 7th, 2020 Drive Task Force meeting in advance. I will now accept the motion for approval of those minutes. Please remember to identify yourself before making a motion. May I have a motion to accept the minutes?
Dr. Townsend Smith, motion to accept the minutes.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Van Dempsey, second.
Thank you. It has been moved and properly seconded that we accept the minutes as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. Are there any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you for your approval of the May 7th meeting minutes. At this time, I will ask that you indulge me as chair of this task force for a few brief moments to speak to what is occurring in our society relative to racial justice. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tiana Jefferson, Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown. An extremely abbreviated list of Black Americans killed by police officers since 2014. The Washington Post reports that Black people have been shot and killed by police at disproportionate rates. Since 2015, police officers have fatally shot and killed unarmed Black people at a rate 4 times higher than unarmed white people. And data also show that unarmed Black men are 4 times more likely to be killed by police than unarmed white men. Over the last few weeks, I have heard people repeatedly say that the criminal justice system is broken. However, I argue that it is not. In fact, I contend that the system is operating as it was designed. We must remember the elements of the criminal justice system. Policing, more specifically, is an outgrowth from slavery. We must remember that while Black people fought for their freedom from slavery by escaping north, slave patrols were established to bring them back to captivity. In 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, incentivizing law enforcement officials to capture Africans suspected of running away, paying officials money to return slaves to their slave owners. This practice became the forerunner of modern American law enforcement. Thus, policing by design was never intended to protect and serve the masses. It was designed to oppress Black people. We must also understand, acknowledge, and accept that the criminal justice system is not the only system that was designed to oppress or exclude people of color. The philosophies, policies, and theories that undergird the formal schooling process were conceptualized, designed, and executed by white people for white people, as Black people, slaves more specifically, were prohibited from learning to read and write. In Janet Cornelius's publication, We Slipped and Learned to Read, Slave Accounts of the Literacy Process, she collects the narratives of slaves who desired to read. In several accounts, these slaves highlight that the common punishments for learning to read and write were amputation, preceded ultimately by death. For those slaves whose owners taught them to read, the sole purpose was for what historians call Bible literacy, a practice insisted upon by early Protestants who believed that the poor and powerless should be able to read the Word of God, but that learning to write would threaten the social order. It's in this context, threatening the social order, that we must remember that our educational system is grounded in institutional racism. As Samuel Broadbelt wrote in 1972, and I quote, "Institutional racism allows a cycle to come into effect. The institution says you are inferior, the individual is judged to be inferior, and the individual finally becomes inferior," end quote. Our educational system has leveraged IQ tests, standardized tests, ability grouping, special education, suspensions, the allocation of teachers, funding formulas, and a wide array of other tools whereby the institution says to Black and brown people, you are inferior. Then that system judges them to be inferior, and, unfortunately, data collected in this skewed system indicate quantitatively that these demographics are inferior. We are all too familiar with these data. We have only analyzed and overanalyzed them for 40 years. You know, those data that illustrate that Black students are much more likely to be suspended from preschool than white students, although Black students only make up 18% of all preschoolers, represent almost 50% of all preschool suspensions. Or those data that evidence that when Black students and white students commit similar infractions in our schools, Black students are suspended and expelled 3 times more often than white students. Or those data that show us that although Black students make up 16% of student enrollment, They represent 27% of students referred to law enforcement and 31% of students subjected to arrest. For those data that show us Black and brown students are wholly absent from academically and intellectually gifted and advanced placement courses. Even more disturbing are the extremely low numbers of Black and brown teachers who provide instruction to those students in academically gifted and advanced placement classes. Although this history of exclusionary practices and institutional racism has been and continues to be the underpinning of our educational system, I am extremely encouraged by the waves of change now crashing upon our shores. I'm pleased to see the multi-ethnic, multiracial protests occurring throughout this nation and across the world as people demand for change. I am pleased to see that individuals from all walks of life are now taking the time to learn about one another and expanding their knowledge of anti-racism. It is my hope that these very people will begin to apply these newfound awareness to the various systems on which this country is founded. It is my hope that in this space we will demand transformation, not reformation. You see, reformation is simply changing language and affixing it on top of a system that was designed by a consciousness of bias and racism. Transformation requires a complete reimagining and revisioning of a system, breaking away from its existing core philosophy, often grounded in oppressive beliefs. To every person participating in this meeting, and to those of you who are listening via the live stream feed, this is the challenge that exists before us, striving for transformation rather than reformation. To the Drive Task Force members, we must remember that initiatives and programs, while likely necessary in the immediacy, are not the long-term solutions to counteract an institutionally racist system. It is imperative that we look deeper. It is imperative that we challenge the status quo. It is imperative we give attention to policies, that we give attention to accountability models, that we give attention to financial systems, that we give attention to curricula, that we give attention to people's attitudes and beliefs rooted in a lack of awareness and skewed by systemic racism. These are the tools that enable and perpetuate oppression in our schools, which lead directly to the lack of available students of color whom we could recruit into teacher preparation programs and ultimately into the teaching profession. But even with the students with whom we currently recruit, white, Black, brown, and otherwise, they must have a much more firm grasp of this country's history and all the Black and brown people who built this country. Our students' knowledge must extend well beyond a cursory awareness of Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Barack Obama. When these students enter our teacher education programs, our curricular, our early field experiences, and our internship placements must be grounded in anti-racism. Otherwise, we perpetuate the very ills of our country's history, where the institution says you are inferior, the individual is judged to be inferior, and the individual finally becomes inferior. When these educators, Black, brown, and any other shade of our diverse pigmentation, enter our classrooms to teach, they must feel valued, respected, and appreciated. And they must demonstrate to all their students, but particularly their Black and brown students, that they too are valued, respected, and appreciated. The work of this task force is grounded in this very challenge. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tatiana Jefferson, Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown. What could have been different in our society had those police officers who killed each one of these individuals and the countless Black and brown people throughout this country's long history, had we dealt with the oppressive, systemic racism undergirding our educational system? Therein, my colleagues, exists our opportunity for systemic change in the state of North Carolina. Thank you for allowing me 8 minutes and 46 seconds to share my thoughts. I promise we will make up the time that I've taken on the back end of our meeting. At this point, I want to turn our attention to the point of entry into the educator pipeline for racially and ethnically diverse teaching candidates, which is where we will begin our work today. By thinking critically about the barriers to entry for aspiring educators of color and learning from successful strategies and partnerships that are finding success, we hope to gain a clearer picture of what this could look like in North Carolina. We are joined this afternoon by 4 fantastic experts and practitioners to share the challenges and opportunities they have faced in working to increase the recruitment of educators of color. Through the robust discussions within our recruitment subcommittee, we have decided to focus on recruitment as a point of entry for aspiring educators into educator preparation programs, as well as recruiting career changers and those who are already certified into school districts with a commitment to increase their teacher diversity. At this time, I would like to welcome our first presenter, Dr. Maria Heiler. Dr. Heiler is a senior researcher with the Learning Policy Institute and is the Deputy Director of their Washington, D.C. office. Dr. Heiler co-leads the Learning Policy Institute's Educator Quality Team, and much of her research has been focused on teacher recruitment and preparation with special focus on educators of color. Today, she will be leading us in a discussion about the barriers that exist for recruiting racially and ethnically diverse educators. If you have questions for our presenters, please message our meeting host through the chat feature on the right side of the WebEx platform, and you will be recognized to share your questions. Dr. Heiler, we're glad to have you, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Graham, and thank you for those powerful words you shared with us. That's the backdrop of all of the research that I'm sharing, and I think it's important to recognize that this is the slice that I'm sharing today, and it's insufficient. We definitely need systems transformation to ensure that the work that you are spearheading gets seen through and accomplished. So thank you very much for the background information. And I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be a part of this meeting and sharing some of Learning Policy Institute's research on recruiting teachers of color. The good news is that much of what I'm going to share today aligns with what the task force has assembled in their issue brief, Developing a Representative and Inclusive Vision for Education. Just a quick reminder of what we know about teachers of color in the workforce. From the Nationally Representative Schools and Staffing Survey, the percentage of teachers of color rose from 12% to 20% from 1987 to 2015. This is good news. However, while the proportion of teachers of color overall are increasing, Black and Native American teacher populations are in decline. The promising news is that 25% of first-year teachers of color in 2015 compared to just 10% in 1987 shows progress in the recruitment of teachers of color. However, we know that high turnover rates can undermine that growth, so I'm glad the task force will be tackling that issue separately at a later time. And we know that all students benefit from a racially diverse teacher workforce. 3 in 4 teachers of color work in the quarter of schools serving the most students of color nationally. These are often under-resourced and hard-to-staff schools. Several studies have found improved academic outcomes for students of color, including increases in math and reading scores and graduation rates. Students of color are less likely to be chronically absent or to be suspended when they have teachers of color. Some research suggests that teachers of color may experience greater satisfaction in schools with more racially diverse faculty. So greater staff diversity might help decrease turnover rates for teachers of color and improve school stability for students. Students, regardless of race, are more likely to report feeling cared about and academically challenged when taught by a teacher of color. And all students can develop the dispositions to work and live in a diverse, anti-racist, and global society when they have racially diverse role models in childhood. Cost is a major barrier in teacher recruitment. While the rising cost of college tuition discourages college students in general from pursuing lower-paying careers like education, research shows it's especially true for students of color who are more likely to report that student debt influences their career choices. Black college students in particular borrow more than other students. And while Black students borrow more than other students, they also owe far more than white graduates years after graduation, almost $25,000 more 4 years after graduation, and $43,000 more 12 years after graduation. While Latino and Latina college students tend to borrow about as much as white borrowers, their loan default rates are about twice as high, suggesting that even the same debt amount presents a greater relative burden for them. So it's not hard to imagine that college students of color might opt to pursue better paying careers, especially when beginning teachers nationally earn about 20% less than college graduates in other fields and 30% less by mid-career. In fact, in 30 states, a teacher heading a family of 4 is eligible for government assistance. States can support candidates of color by underwriting the cost of teacher preparation. Service scholarship and loan forgiveness programs cover or reimburse a portion of tuition costs in exchange for a commitment to teach in high-need schools or subject areas, typically for 3 to 5 years. These programs are effective at recruiting teachers, especially when they underwrite a significant portion of educational costs. A recent study of the correlation between financial incentives and teacher diversity found that the availability of loan forgiveness in a district was associated with an increase of teachers of color of nearly 4 percentage points. That's 25% more than the average district. Only about 40% of college students finish within 4 years, but it's even lower for Black, Native American, Latino, Latina, and Pacific Islander college students. Scholars cite, again, the high cost of college, having to work, transportation difficulties, family responsibilities, and dissatisfaction with faculty diversity and curriculum. Teacher licensure exams are a barrier to completing teacher preparation and thus recruiting teachers of color. An evaluation of the praxis exam found gaps in pass rates as high as 38% by race, with lower scores and pass rates for Black, Latino, Latina, and Asian American test takers. There's little evidence that these teacher tests consistently and accurately predict teacher effectiveness, which is what we really care about. Performance assessments like the PPAT, EdTPA, Cal TPA, and others are alternatives that many states are turning to replace paper and pencil tests. 18 states have policies in place that allow or require teacher candidates to pass a performance assessment, and more are moving in that direction. On a final note, insufficient preparation also proves to be a barrier to recruitment. I know the task force will be doing a focus on preparation in the future, but I do want to highlight how successful recruitment can depend on the preparation pathway. For example, with the cost of college, it's no surprise that many teachers of color choose alternative certification pathways into teaching. 1 in 4 teachers of color enter the field through an alternative certification program. That's twice the rate of white teachers. We know that teachers who enter through those pathways have turnover rates 25% higher than those who enter through traditional pathways. North Carolina's lateral entry percentage matches the national rate exactly. While there's variation in the quality of alternative certification programs, on average, these candidates complete less coursework and student teaching, if any, before becoming responsible for their own students. More comprehensive teacher preparation, like that available through the UNC system, are the types of program we want to recruit students into. While lateral entry rates of retention are 65% after 3 years, the UNC retention rate in that same time frame is 85%. Strategic recruitment of teachers of color necessitates looking at preparation pathways. That's why we should be reframing this issue as incentivizing recruitment into high retention pathways. I'd like to end with some specific examples of promising practices in recruitment for teachers of color. North Carolina set record. The North Carolina Teaching Fellows Program is an excellent example of a program that works and can be expanded and redesigned to support greater recruitment of teachers of color. North Carolina can set recruitment benchmarks and provide targeted incentives for high-needs fields and communities. The long-standing, highly successful program ended briefly and then restarted at a much lower level of funding with new features. It currently provides up to $33,000 per candidate over 4 years to cover the cost of teacher preparation in exchange for an 8-year commitment to teach, 4 years if teaching at a low-performing school. Demand for the program far exceeds the number of funded slots. In 2019, there were 2,000 applicants for just 200 slots. The state should significantly expand its investment in this program and consider refinements to better target recruitment to and deeper preparation for rural, high-poverty schools. The state could set recruitment goals, increasing candidates from 200 to 1,000 within 3 years and to 2,000 within 5 years. Reinstate leadership training to include culturally responsive training. Expand the number of campuses to include historically Black colleges and universities. Target candidates to high poverty and rural schools. Other programs successful at recruiting teachers of color include teacher residencies, in which residents apprentice with a master teacher for an entire year while they complete a master's degree at a partnering university. About 50% of residents nationally are people of color. They also tend to have much higher retention rates than their peers and are found to be effective. North Carolina A&T Teacher Residency is an example of a model that should be expanded and replicated within the state. To accomplish the expansion of this kind of high-quality program, the state would need to better design the teacher residency route recently legislated as a means to replace the lateral entry license through Senate Bill 599. Currently, the definition of the bill does not adequately incorporate the features of successful residencies and could lead to suboptimal training and misses the draws and benefits of a well-developed residency program. 2+2 programs are partnerships between community colleges and four-year colleges. Candidates can earn a teaching credential with considerable savings, mitigating one of the major barriers to recruiting teachers of color, financial costs. And I know that Dr. Bianco will be talking about Grow Your Own programs more in just a few minutes. But this model has been particularly successful in recruiting teachers of color. North Carolina's TA to Teachers program supports teachers' assistants in earning their teacher certification, often through community college pathways. Interviews recently completed with those graduates show how successful this has been, especially in some rural communities. Expanding this Grow Your Own program would be a strategic way to support a stronger, more diverse, and stable teaching force in these communities. A companion strategy is to expand high school career academy programs, such as the North Carolina Teacher Cadet Program. Finally, some other recruitment policies to consider are data and licensure policies that require teacher preparation programs to monitor teacher diversity. This can incentivize programs to better recruit and support candidates of color. Districts can move hiring timelines earlier, partnering with minority-serving institutions and offer comprehensive new teacher mentoring. I'm sure that's something that Dr. Pearson will be touching on more deeply. And then teaching conditions, we don't often talk about in terms of relation to recruitment, but they are critical to highlighting teaching as an attractive option for students of color. States can take advantage of the 3% Title II set-aside to strengthen the quality of school leaders, including investing in principal recruitment, preparation, induction, and development, and other federal funding sources like the 7% Title I set-aside for school improvement and Title IV funding for student support and academic enrichment. All these strategies make teaching a more attractive option for students of color considering a career in teaching. Our report has more details on all these topics. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I think we might have some time for questions.
We do. Thank you, Dr. Heiler. At this point, I will ask task force members, if you would please, if you'll present your question in the chat area so I can recognize it there, and then we'll address those questions in order as we receive them. And while we're waiting on questions to come in, Dr. Heiler, again, thank you for your presentation. I want to ask a question specifically around the teacher residency model. You had North Carolina A&T's teacher residency, and I was fortunate to be the dean of the College of Education when that grant proposal was written and submitted to the Department of Education for funding. So I know the intimate details of that proposal, and I know how much it costs to have a residency if you do it properly in place. My question for you would be, how could the state of North Carolina go about implementing some of these teacher residencies given the extreme costs that tend to be associated with those programs, although we know data inform us that these residency models, if implemented well, have significant impact on teacher retention and student learning. Any thoughts around that aspect?
Yes, actually quite a few. And one of the first things I want to point out, which is not super helpful in terms of funding residencies, but the fact of the matter is teacher turnover costs districts millions of dollars every year. So one of the things we need to think about is not only thinking about the cost of preparing teachers, but the cost of losing teachers, and really help people to understand, and districts to help invest in teacher residency models and models that have high retention, because it's a waste of money recruiting into programs that don't prepare teachers to be able to stay in the classroom. The second piece that is more applicable to the actual cost is that there is a whole body of research and literature around sustainable funding for residencies. And we have a partnership with an organization out of Bank Street Graduate School of Education called Prepared to Teach that focuses on sustainable models of residencies. And while that's not my area of research, I can share with you some of those resources to help programs get started and to remain in existence and be sustainable outside of philanthropic monies. So there is definitely some models out there that take into account to the funds that are available for districts and schools of education to have sustainable models.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Rebecca Blanchard, you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. Hi, Maria. I'm Rebecca Blanchard from the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm wondering if we or if any other states, if you have more of a national lens, are considering any changes to typical policies around teacher examination or licensure exams given COVID. And could this be an opportunity, going back to Chairman Graham's statement earlier, to think about transforming our systems as opposed to just reforming them, particularly around examinations? Just wondering your perspectives there.
Yes, absolutely a great question. I think that this creates a moment in time where there's a lot of states out of necessity are waiving entrance exams into teacher preparation programs or giving students a longer time period. I do believe in North Carolina, they have through the end of the first year of teaching to be able to complete the praxis. And other states are also looking at and thinking about other ways to exemplify subject matter mastery. So it could be through coursework, or it could be through these performance assessments, which have much lower disparate impact on candidates of color than our traditional standardized testing. So there's a menu of options for thinking about those entry exams and really ensuring that we're getting the best teachers without having a barrier that doesn't really predict consistently the quality of teaching. And I think that's what's most important and most problematic with those tests.
We also have a question from Alexandra Zagbayu.
Hi, this is Alexandra Zagbayu from Student U. I'm really encouraged to hear how you all talked about teacher residency program. I'm in Durham and working with Durham Public Schools to actually build a Grow Your Own program, one of the components will be a teacher residency program. I'm interested in what are cornerstones of highly effective and successful programs. I hear the concern about the cost, which I think is a real one, but it would be helpful if you could articulate what your research has demonstrated as we imagine what's possible in our communities and in North Carolina.
Great, thank you, Alexandra. I think that this is a really important topic of conversation because as residencies have become more fashionable across the nation, people are calling themselves residencies and they're not having all of the hallmarks of what makes a residency successful. So it's really important that some of the foundational pieces are in place. So the first is a financial aspect. So there's actually some people who call themselves a residency and then charge $45,000 for candidates to go through their program. At the heart of the residency program is a tuition reimbursement and some cost of living stipend that allows the candidate to be able to live and focus on studying to be the best teacher that they can be. And that living stipend has to be a significant amount of money to be able to live off of and to not have to take a second job or to carry additional debt. So that's the first cornerstone. The second is that a residency should be a year long with one master teacher under the candidate learning under a mentor teacher who is an accomplished teacher. And so that is important because a lot of times you have programs where teachers are thrown in more quickly as teacher of record than they should be, but this allows a resident to see how a teacher thinks about setting up their classroom, what kinds of norms and practices they begin with their students at the beginning of the year, and then deeply embeds them in the school and the class across the whole school year so that by the end of the year, the teacher is prepared to take over the class fully and then include in their own teaching practice the types of practices that they learn from their accomplished mentor teacher. The third thing is really tightly woven theory and coursework, theoretic coursework and the classroom experience. So a lot of people often lean towards practice as being most important, and practice is important when theory is there to undergird what the practices are accomplishing. So while the actual time in the classroom with the mentor teacher is important, the coursework should be sculpted to support the learning that's happening in the classwork, in the classroom, and support with learning theory, child development, culturally responsive pedagogies, healing-informed practices. All of those pieces are really important theoretical pieces that should be taught in a way that reflects what's happening in the classroom. Another important pillar of a residency program is continued support and network after the first year of the residency. So a lot of the residency programs, they keep in touch with the graduates and there's cohorts, and it's a professional network where they can receive guidance and continued mentoring after they have entered the classroom. I think those are the four key pieces. The fifth that just came to mind is that it needs to be an authentic relationship between a district and a preparation program. Oftentimes, preparation programs don't think about the needs of districts, and so they'll create a program that doesn't align with what the teacher needs are in the school district. So they're preparing English teachers when they really need special education teachers or math teachers, right? And that reciprocal relationship is necessary to be able to prepare those teachers for that context, because you want a teacher to know the student, know the community, have a relationship with parents and families and communities. And so the authentic relationship between a preparation program and a K-12 school district is really vital as well.
Thank you so much.
Great. Again, thank you, Dr. Heiler. I know we have a number of other questions, but we have come to the end of the segment for Dr. Heiler's presentation. Throughout our meeting, I'll ask task force members, if you have remaining questions, please make sure that you are continuing to submit those in the chat area, and we will get back to you with a response as soon as we possibly can. Also, I want to remind those individuals who are listening to the live stream that we are only accepting questions from members of the task force. So we're entertaining task force members' inquiries throughout today's conversation. Again, thank you, Dr. Heiler. We appreciate it. Fantastic presentation, and I am certain you will hear more from us moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. My pleasure.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Denise Pearson. Dr. Pearson is the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Equity Initiatives at the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, better known as SHEO. She is a former Dean of the Faculty of Education and Assistant Provost of Faculty Affairs at my beloved Winston-Salem State University, and recently led Project Pipeline Repair, Restoring Minority Male Participation and Persistence in Educator Preparation Programs. We're excited to have Dr. Pearson with us today to share more about lessons that we can learn relative to recruitment within minority-serving institutions, and specifically her recent program, Project Pipeline Repair, an initiative dedicated to restoring participation of male educators of color in educator preparation programs in historically Black colleges and universities. As with our previous presentation, I'd ask all task force members to please remain muted and let us know through the chat feature if you have any questions for Dr. Pearson. Dr. Pearson, again, glad to have you, and it's always great to see you.
There we go. Can you hear me? Am I good?
You are good.
Okay, awesome. So thank you again, Dr. Graham, for the opportunity to join this important conversation. I want to extend a special message of praise to Governor Cooper for his bold leadership and commitment to action through the establishment of DRIVE, developing a representative and inclusive vision for education. A little bit about SHEO before I start talking about the initiative near and dear to my heart. SHEO is the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association that serves the chief executives of statewide governing policy and coordinating boards of post-secondary education and their staff. We were founded in 1954, and our role is to engage in work that ensures the equitable education of all Americans, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or socioeconomic factors. You can go to our website if you'd like to learn more about us, including the work that I'm going to talk about in a moment. In addition to what you see here in terms of our statement of purpose, in essence, we advocate for state policy leadership. We act as a liaison between states and the federal government, and we provide information and analysis on educational and public policy issues, and teacher education is one of those areas. So again, I'm just delighted to be part of this conversation. I was asked to speak for 15 to 20 minutes about Project Pipeline Repair, to leave time for questions and answers at the end. So what I plan to do with that time that I have, I want to provide some background information about this 3-year pilot program, share some of the many lessons learned, and hopefully through it all contribute to the work that you're doing through DRIVE. I've heard John Oliver say one night while responding to the killing of George Floyd, that the scale of the solution must match the scale of the problem. So for me, Project Pipeline Repair is an attempt to breathe life into an idea that I have been carrying around for many, many years. And it's the scale of the strategies implemented through the project, I think, match the scale of the problems that exist today, including those which Dr. Graham so eloquently and heartfeltly talked about in his opening comments. I was almost in tears, but I was risking messing up my makeup, man. You were putting me in a very uncomfortable situation there. So that's what I plan to do with the time that I have. So to frame my conversation, when I was thinking about, what is the foundation of project pipeline repair? What are some of the foundational principles? I thought about an old Nigerian proverb that said, in the moment of crisis, the wise build bridges and the foolish build dams. The country and school systems are in crisis, and DRIVE is an example of real bridge building in the state of North Carolina, and it has implications for the entire country. And project pipeline repair was a notion that I had with regard to national bridge building in the teacher preparation space. Okay. So I work for a policy organization, and I thought it was important to remind folks that the way I see this work, there's a clear intersection that we have to always keep in mind between policy and practice. Policy enables practice. It's responsible for funding and guidelines, but it's good practice that informs policy and thus can lead to the funding that many of us talk about needing so much more of. I want to note that the work that we're doing at SHIO through Project Pipeline Repair, we focus on authentic cross-sector collaborations. And when I think about this, when I thought about Project Pipeline Repair, it was immediately clear that we had to bring state agencies and systems of education, higher education together with educator preparation, faculty and researchers, along with their P12 school districts and EPP partners. That's the way the grant was written, and that's the way the work was carried out from beginning through the end. It brought together multiple sectors, multiple perspectives. It was built on consensus building, collective action, and transparency and trust was very important and foundational. So, I love my quotes, and at the very beginning of putting together Project Pipeline Repair, it was in all of our early documents, I said, he who has a why can endure anyhow. So when I thought about why is DRIVE so strategically important to North Carolina, from where I sit working for a policy organization, states have attainment goals, they have workforce needs, and they have equity agendas. I don't know what North Carolina's attainment goal is, but I know that they're not going to get there unless we address this teacher pipeline issue. We all know that education is the most consequential of all professions. All professions go through the teaching profession. I remember real quickly, just a little side note, when I was going around, talking to young men about entering the teaching profession, they would say to me, I don't understand how it is that we have to go through so much and pay so much to become a teacher, but when we enter the field, we get paid so little, but yet doctors couldn't be doctors and lawyers couldn't be lawyers if it weren't for teachers. So that sticks with me. So we all know that there's this nationwide teacher shortage, and it transcends race. But I think it's important for us to focus on diversity and equity, because I think that's going to be integral to achieving any of our attainment, workforce, or equity agendas. And, I'm going to go through this really quickly because Dr. Hyler mentioned many of this, but non-white students represent the majority of students in our public schools. Less than 20% of teachers come from communities of color. But this is what Project Pipeline Repair focused on, and that was the fact that less than 3% of teachers are males from communities of color. Lack of teacher diversity has a negative impact on their achievement. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's these inequitable systems of education that Dr. Graham spoke about that are a challenge to teacher diversity efforts. So that is where this work is coming from. This is the trend. I think this study came out of UCLA, it did, and they interviewed a couple of thousand of students, and they asked them, what are your interests in education as a major? And this started in 2005 to 2015, and you can see the steady decline. And I am not seeing the trend going in a different direction, but I think it's important for you to see this. Coupled with an attrition rate of 8% of teachers annually, enrollments are increasing. There are lots of reasons behind this: competition from other professions, compensation, the image of the profession, which was another one of the goals of Project Pipeline Repair, and then the challenging work environment that other panelists have already talked about. So this slide, I think, is interesting because we know that our personal life experiences impact our perception of others. So in one study, college freshmen were asked, how would you describe the racial composition of the neighborhood where you grew up? And these were their responses. And if you look, most of them grew up in mostly white, roughly white, and mostly non-white, but very few of them grew up in diverse communities. And this is really important because if you look at Arthur Combs, he did a study and he talked about where we get our attitudes and our dispositions, and he put them in categories. Where do our dispositions about subject matter come from, about self, about other people, about the teaching task, and a general frame of reference? Well, teachers carry perceptions that fall into all of these categories. And I underlined number 3 because when you talk about your perceptions about other people, this is what it means. You're categorizing people based on who's able, unable, who's dependable, undependable, worthy, unworthy. And this translates into how high of expectations do teachers have on students of color, especially for students of color, especially if they have little or no exposure to them. So I talked a little bit before about attainment goals. There's a federal attainment goal that 60% of adults between the ages of 25 to 34 years old would have a degree by the year of 2020. States have attainment goals between 25 and 65% of 25 and 60-year-olds having a degree by 2025. And the Lumina Foundation, a major funder in this workspace, they have a 60% goal for 25 to 65-year-olds by the year 2025. When you look at progress, experts like Michael Nettles from ETS, he made some projections about the extent to which attainment goals would be met. So look at this here, not projected to reach, projected to reach, and projected to reach on time. What group of students do you think are not expected to reach the goal by 2020? I can tell you it's African American and Hispanic males and females as well. But among those projected to reach the goal by 2060, African American men are missing. We have a problem. This is a crisis. So Dr. Heiler talked a little bit about the impact of teachers of color on student success, and there is a huge study that was done on it by several researchers. So it doesn't just sit in the lap of one researcher. This is an expanding area of inquiry, but this is what having a teacher of color does, particularly for young men of color. You see impact on high school graduation rates. You see decreases in school suspensions and expulsions. But if you look at academic achievement, you see a reduction in placement in special education courses. Tyler talked about advanced placement courses. You see increased participation in dual credit programs, honor classes, study abroad, and they're more likely to have a mentor. This is what diversifying the teaching force can do in North Carolina and beyond. And this is not just a Black thing. I'm a New Yorker, so I had to get that in there. This is not just a Black thing. There is something that may be even more important than Black students having Black teachers, and that is white students having Black teachers. It's important for white students to encounter Black people who are knowledgeable. That's Gloria Ladson Billings, and I'm sure the majority of you in this audience know who she is. And then there's Melinda Anderson, who writes for The Atlantic. She says, anecdotal and empirical evidence suggests that teachers of color can help disrupt what are often one-sided, implicitly biased, portrayers of the world and offer invaluable insights to students from different backgrounds. So again, this is not just about the academic and social development of Black students, it's for all of our kids. So now that brings me to Project Pipeline Repair, restoring minority male participation and persistence in educator preparation programs. It is a research-based response to persistent underrepresentation of minority male educators in our P-12 classrooms. We found through our work that students of color aspiring to join the teaching profession are often, too often, confronted by formidable program admission and completion barriers, which involve unmitigated opportunity and achievement gaps, insufficient familiarity with standardized testing, EPP program costs, and such as testing, clinical insurance, background checks, and the other. And then there's the issue of the teaching profession facing an image crisis. And in a little while, I'll share with you some direct quotes that I got from students throughout the process. So this is the scope of the problem again, but I wanted to bring something to your attention here that I did not bring to your attention in an earlier slide, and that is, and Dr. Brown talked about, Dr. Graham talked about this a little bit, but back in 1954, after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, we failed to pay attention to the 35,000 teachers of color who lost their jobs. But not only did they lose those jobs as a direct result of discriminatory and racial practices, admission requirements to get into teacher preparation programs shifted, and that also had a negative effect on teachers of color, and particularly African American males wanting to enter the profession. I'm going through this quickly because I am a woman of my word. I said I would be done in 20 minutes, but all of these PowerPoint slides will be made available to everyone in the audience. So the focus of Project Pipeline Repair was to help our states come up with policies and practices to address teacher shortages, to increase teacher diversity, counter the counterproductive narratives about the profession. But important to me was, what is the role of historically Black colleges and universities in those strategies? So the objectives of the program were to establish a consortium of state policy leaders and HBCUs to explore best practices to diversify the profession, to enhance the academic performance of project participants, to prepare the participants for college success and EPP completion, to shift the narrative about the teaching profession and the role of HBCUs and minority males, and then to develop strategies to scale the program to include more males in HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions. This was our logic model, if you would, and I did not put this together in isolation. I brought all of the stakeholders together to Boulder when we started this program, and we put this logic model together, and we said if we had funding, if we had the support of SHIELD staff, if we had the buy-in from HBCU EPPs, school partners, state agencies, as well as the high school students themselves, and if we engaged in these activities, which you'll see in the second column, well, this is what the outcomes, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impact would be. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And again, you will have a copy of this slide. They will make that available to you. So I got this question over and over again, because not all states have historically Black colleges and universities. And I would get the question, why just historically Black colleges and universities? And I looked at it from a couple of perspectives. One, HBCUs are they are part of the American higher education ecosystem, which is very diverse. We have HBCUs, we have women's colleges, we have church-affiliated colleges, Hispanic-serving institutions, as well as tribal colleges, and they all have a place in our American higher education system. But I've also been clear in my position that I see HBCUs as pioneers of culturally responsive pedagogy. Many of them began as teachers' colleges, and they remain relevant and a critical component of our diverse higher education ecosystem. They are a national resource. They are not obstacles to diversity and integration. In fact, they are more diverse and integrated than many of our contemporaries. And then lastly, you look on the Department of Education's White House initiative for HBCUs. They are still legitimate academic spaces that meet the unique needs of African Americans as well as others. So when I get the question, why just historically Black colleges and universities, I said, this is how we need to pilot this program, and that is what we did. I also think that HBCUs are uniquely positioned through their curriculum to respond to contemporary matters, including curriculum and culture. They can prepare teachers to serve in high-need, high-poverty schools. And we're preparing them, knowing the impact of poverty and trauma on our students. We're preparing them to be more than content and pedagogy experts. Many times, these are role models, surrogate parents, mentors, and they are models of intellectual authority. So again, that was my thinking as I went into this work. So one of the things that we keep in mind at SHIO is that state context matters. What happens, what works in North Carolina will not work in Montana. But the fact of the matter is North Carolina, with regard to your drive work, you have historically Black colleges and universities, you have American Indian Alaska serving institutions, you have Hispanic serving institutions. They are located in diverse regions of the state. They have diverse, inclusive student bodies, and they have diverse and inclusive faculties and staff. So with regard to the work of drive, I don't think you could pick a better state to do this work and serve as a model for other states. So I mentioned to you earlier that in preparation for the work of Project Pipeline Repair, I interviewed about 60 undergraduate African American men, and I asked them, "What's your thought about, becoming a teacher?" When I asked you, what do you think about that idea? What do you think? And these are all the things they said to me. Now, I'm not saying I'm just giving you what they gave me. Males want to be inside the gym coaching. Is there a way that we can teach and be a coach? To me, this signaled they really don't have an understanding of the teaching profession. The pay is horrible. It's depressing. It's all about year-end testing. Praxis, check this out, folks. That's a tongue twister. Praxis is a systematic way of keeping us out of the profession. But I still want to give back to my community. The education system just gives up on people, just passes them through. This is another key one. I wish I knew ahead of time all that was required to complete an EPP. There are no incentives to enroll in an EPP or become a teacher. Needed too much coaching to pass the praxis. Well, if we had a different, and I'm not saying teachers as they exist today are bad or ineffective, but I think if we had a more diversified teaching profession and we had different types of educator preparation curriculum, maybe the outcomes would be such that they wouldn't need as much coaching when it came time to take the praxis. But then look at that last quote again. I just want to help children to be successful. These folks want to help. But as Dr. Graham and Dr. Lahiro said earlier, there are too many barriers, and it's working against all of us as a state and as a nation. So lessons learned. This is what we learned. These are the kind of things that help and hinder mitigating teacher shortages. Teacher loan forgiveness, dual credit and concurrent enrollment. It is a game changer. That was one of the things that we required in Project Pipeline Repair, or not required, that was one of the goals, that all students that went through our program had to have 3 to 6 credits completed that could be applied towards their education degree. We know that grow your own teacher cadet models. I don't want to read over anything that's already been said. Mentorship programs. When we did evaluations of the students after they completed the program, I can't tell you how often they pointed to the positive effect of having a mentor played on their decision either to enter the teaching profession or rethink previous notions they had about being an African American male in the teaching profession. I wrote connect, distract, that's not the right word, but connect state benefits with other benefits? Are there benefits in your state that may not be part of your human resources or compensation package that you can connect prospective teachers to that they may not know about? This is what hinders them: national calls with no follow-up, institutions not being committed to HBCUs, current teacher certification requirements, admission barriers, lack of extended support for new teachers. We hire them and then we say, you're on your own. Microwave teacher preparation programs. These are their words. I'm just giving it to you as it came to me. Funding limitations. They get these grants. They show promise, but then there is no support for sustainability from the district, the state, or where else. I know I'm running out of time, but removing participation and completion barriers, again, dual credit is a game changer. Early exposure to the demands of post-secondary education is an outcome, improved student performance in high school as well as when they get to college, early exposure to the education profession through culturally relevant coursework. Again, we required students to take 6 credits of college-level courses. We chose Foundations of Education and Diversity and Multiculturalism in Education, but every state, every EPP is different. You have to figure out what works best for you. And then there was always a focus on equity-minded policy and practice. So what does it mean to be equity-minded? When you start thinking about these policies and these practices, what are the different groups involved in these discussions? Have they been meaningfully engaged? Goes back to collaboration. How will it negatively impact different groups? How will it increase or reduce disparities? How will these policies or practices impact different groups? What can be done to increase a positive impact? What is the policy practice? Why does it affect some groups differently? And are these policies and practices adequately funded? And how will success be measured? So this is my last slide. I think it's my last slide. Oh, no, I think it needs to be my last slide. I just want to leave this as a thought for you. What could an interdisciplinary consortium of in North Carolina HBCU educator programs look like? How could you put together a group? What would the rationale be? Maybe there's not. I think there is. What would the scope of that consortium look like? Who would be the collaborators? What would be your key performance indicators? And what would the contribution to states and institutions of higher education and other stakeholders look like? The last thing I have here, this is last slide. This is my teaching oath. When I get an opportunity to teach, this is a promise that I make to all of my students. And I think it's important that when you talk about diversifying the teaching force, you need to know that every teacher standing in front of those kids takes their responsibility seriously, and they promise to give them all the opportunity to become their very best. And I think I'm on time. Am I on time, Dr. Graham?
You're right on time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's my contact information if anyone would like to reach out.
Thank you, Dr. Pearson. In the chat, I see that we have one question, and we're running a little long in terms of time.
Okay.
So I'll ask that if you can, Dr. Pearson, just continue to hang with us through the rest of the meeting, and at the tail end, if there are questions for you, we'll make sure that we get those to you so you can address them.
Are you telling me I went over?
Just by a couple of minutes. Oh. But it's all love.
Okay.
Thank you again, Dr. Pearson.
You're welcome.
At this time, I would like to welcome our next presenter, Mr. Tariq Higgins. Mr. Higgins is the Program Administrator at the Lateral Entry Resource and Advising Center with Guilford County Schools. Today, he is joining us to discuss the Guilford County Schools Alternative Certification Track. This program partners with area HBCUs and recruits career changers from STEM fields to increase the district's pool of diverse educators. Please continue to let us know through the chat feature if you have any questions for Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins, we are so glad to have you join us this afternoon, and it is good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Doctor. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Graham. It's good to see you as well. And thanks again for that powerful opening statement that you led with. That really touched me. I think as it touched a lot of other people on this call today. And thank you again on behalf of our superintendent, Dr. Sharon Contreras, and our Chief of Human Resources, Dr. Shirley Morrison, thank you for giving this opportunity to talk to you briefly about our program in Guilford County and some of the things that we've done over the years. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and so today we'll just give you kind of an overview of our program and also talking about recruiting efforts that we put together with HBCUs here in North Carolina. This slide here just shows our team down here at the bottom and also shows some of our teachers that have gone through our program throughout the year. My team members are Dr. Flora Luke, Leslie Ross, and Alicia Sinclair, and so the four of us make up our GCSAC program. Just to give you a brief overview about our program and how we got started. Back in 2008, a lot of school districts, especially here in Guilford County, were hiring teachers into lateral entry teachers and pretty much kind of just hiring them, kind of going through a training, but not giving them the tools that they needed to be successful. So back in 2008, thanks to Senate Bill 115, which granted local agencies the right to begin their own in-house licensure program, the Lateral Entry Resource and Advising Center and our in-house licensure program, Guilford County Schools Alternative Certification Track, was born. And so with our GCSAC program and the Advising Center, we wanted to focus on helping these lateral entry teachers to be successful in the classroom by having them go through a full 10-day class, 10-day orientation. Now, mind you, our principals were not happy to hear that they had to wait 10 days to get their teachers, but we felt as though by having something on the front end to try to help them to at least be successful, they would last and stay longer in the profession. And so to help with the start of our GCSAC program and Advising Center, we were granted a Transition to Teach grant from the Department of Education. So with this grant, it gave us the funds that we needed to get this off the ground and running. And throughout this, with our GCSAC program, has successfully graduated more than 500 teachers as of last summer of 2019. In 2012, because of the success of the first grant we had, we were looking to increase our minority teachers to help reflect the racial makeup of our students and community. So we applied for a second Transition to Teaching grant, which we were granted. But this time we changed the focus completely on that second grant to recruiting minority candidates. At the time, our colleges and universities were underproducing teacher candidates in the STEM areas. So the focus of this grant was to focus on hiring minority candidates in our STEM areas. And so we reached out to the grant was focused around our HBCUs. Here. So with this new grant, our goal was to recruit and support minority teacher candidates to teach STEM subjects in our district's highest need schools. One challenge that we faced was reassuring to our university teacher education programs that we were not trying to take away from their programs. We were just looking for other sources to add on to what we already, the great relationships we had with teacher education programs. And so we just were looking for other avenues. So that was one of the biggest challenges we had, is just getting teacher education programs to realize that, hey, we're not trying to take away from you. We want to work together with your education, but also look into your STEM areas on your campus as well to find other great candidates to teach. So with this, we had three objectives that we wanted to focus on. We wanted to recruit, prepare, and support. First, recruit STEM majors to teach in high-need schools. So the grant's focus was to recruit minority candidates and create a partnership with 4 HBCUs that were within 50 miles of Guilford County. The universities and colleges we reached were Bennett College, North Carolina A&T, North Carolina Central University, and Winston-Salem State. Second, we wanted to prepare minority candidates to be effective teachers. So they entered our GCS Act program, licensure program. And last, we wanted to support them by assigning a coach to help support them in the classroom. With the first objective, we hired a STEM recruiter to work in partnership with the HBCUs to focus on recruiting efforts with juniors, seniors, and graduate level students in STEM departments. Our STEM recruiter met with the deans from the math, the science, technology, and engineering departments. The recruiter also met with the professors and established relationships not only with the deans but the professors to help discover students that would be great candidates to teach. Our recruiter had events such as classroom information sessions, set up information tables in the departments to talk with students, and attended career fairs. With the recruiter, building relationships was the key to success of finding students that may not have considered the teaching profession. Our recruiter would go and talk with professors, and the professors would tell our recruiter, hey, I have a kid that's helping tutor my students that I think would be really great in the classroom. So the recruiter would cultivate their relationship with that student and other students to build a relationship with them. They would bring them to the school district. We would get them set up to sub, have them shadow some of our former graduates that had gone through our GCS Act program. So we put things in place to kind of get the student interest in wanting to teach. The second objective was preparing teachers for the classroom. So once we established candidates that were hired in our high-need schools, they were put into our GCS Act program where they received over 290 hours of training. Our coursework is closely aligned with the North Carolina Professional Teaching Standards, and we also provided practice to support with preparation, materials, and workshops. With our GCS Act program, it's broken into 3 phases, and so this is what our STEM teachers went through as they went through their first year. First, we had the Foundations of Teaching and Learning, which was a competency-based course in which teachers must demonstrate research-based practices that causes student thinking. Second, we had exploratory tasks, which gives our teachers an opportunity to observe veteran teachers with their school and build relationship with students, teachers, and stakeholders within the community. And lastly, it was our building blocks, which were building blocks took place in the summertime for 5-week courses that take place over the summer and focus on the principles of backwards design and unit planning. Let's see. So the benefits of our GCS Act program that was not only beneficial to everyone that went through our program, but to our students from the HBCUs was the coaching from a residency licensed coach. So we had, as I stated earlier, our 3 coaches would come out to the school. They would observe them, give them feedback, help them with lesson planning, sit in on classes. The teachers would determine a classroom that was a class that was very hard for them, and so our coaches would come in to observe them and help them navigate the problems that they may have been having in that classroom. Also, we had a low tuition cost. As I think it's stated earlier, in some EPPs, the cost can be a little more that most people can handle. And so we have a low tuition cost thanks to our school district of helping to absorb some of that cost. The cost of our students is $1,250. We also had our teachers to go through a cohort model that offers a network support. So with our STEM candidates, we put them all together, our math, our science, technology, engineering students together in one cohort. So not only were they getting the teaching and the lessons from our classes, but they also got an opportunity to collaborate amongst themselves to help them to navigate this new profession that they're in. Also at the schools, they had a mentor as well. So with the coach we had, the mentor, and the collaboration amongst themselves, it helped them to navigate teaching. Also, with our licensure, at the time we started, we were lateral entry, which If you finished our coursework and passed your practice within that first year, you were able to finish in 11 and 12 months. Now that we have EdTPA, it would probably take teachers more along 18 to 20 months probably to finish our coursework because of that new EdTPA component that the state has just added on. So the last objective was retaining teachers. And so as I mentioned in the last slide, the coaching aspect was a crucial part in helping our teachers succeed. But we also wanted to provide other incentives. So when we had the transition to teaching grant, if you finished your coursework and passed your practice, you got a $1,000 bonus. Also, for our STEM candidates, they got a $2,000 signing bonus. So not only are they getting that teacher pay, they also had opportunity to earn an additional $3,000. Now this $3,000 was granted because of the grant we had. Now that we no longer have the grant, we're not able to give the incentives as we used to. So one of the incentives that we have in place right now is that if you are able to finish the coursework, pass your practice, complete EdTPA, we will within a year or within that 18 months, we would take off $150 off of your tuition cost that you had. So these are just some of the little things, and I think as all educators we know, funding is a key to, and incentives of funding and teacher salary is key to helping to retain teachers. And so trying to come up with things that can be helpful success to help folks stay in the profession is always something we look for. And so with this HBCU partnership, some of the partnership with HBCUs was a benefit to GCS and the universities and colleges. The partnership with faculty and students and the recruiter helped to build relations with all stakeholders with the informational and advising sessions. So by building those relationships, the professors would call us even before our recruiter would come on campus and say, hey, I have this student in my class this semester that I think would be great for your program. And so the professors and the deans knew about what we were doing. And so within that second year of that grant, the recruiter didn't have to do as much work as he did because of the relationships that he or she built with those professors and deans. And so they were bringing candidates to us. And the students themselves were telling us of other students that they knew, whether they were in the math department, the science department, or any other department that they thought would be a great candidate as well to go to become a teacher. And so it just helped us all along. And lastly, with this partnership with HBCUs, it promoted economic stability by keeping graduates in the Gifford County community. So not only were they contributing to our economy and contributing to Gifford County, but they were still here with the alma mater, being able to still do all the great things that they were doing as undergrad, but now as an alumni of that university, they were still here to still enjoy going to football games or basketball games or doing whatever they could for their alma mater as well. And lastly, this last slide just shows some of the data that we've noticed over the last couple of years with our GCSAT candidates are representative of a cultural diversity of the students within our school, in our school district. In the past 3 years, 69% of our graduates are minorities and 37% of our graduates are males. And so we're kind of proud of that, of what we've done over these last 10, 11 years, and hopefully can continue on moving forward in doing this. It's always, like I said before, it's always great to have funding to help to support some of these things and give you incentives. But I think one of the biggest things that you can do is always have building relationships. We always tell our teachers to build relationships with our students. And so that's what we were trying to do with the HBCUs, building relationships that we could find great candidates in the math, science, technology, engineering departments as well. And like I said, a lot of these things that we did based off of a grant, and we're not necessarily doing them at the same level as we did before, but we still have those relationships with those 4 HBCUs, and we've also tried to reach out to other HBCUs within the state of North Carolina, and we've also gone outside of North Carolina This year we've gone to Morehouse and Spelman this year on recruitment trips to find minority candidates. So the folks are out there. We just got to keep searching and looking for them. And I feel like I might have gone through that kind of fast there, Dr. Graham, but any questions and answers there?
No, you're right on time, Mr. Higgins. No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes for Mr. Higgins. So task force members, I will ask you if you have questions to please put those questions in the chat area, and then we will address them as we receive them. Mr. Higgins, while we're waiting, and I hate to dominate the conversation here, but I remember when Dr. Holcomb and the team pulled this together for the Transition to Teaching grant way back in 2008, that there was, of course, and you've alluded to this, grant money along the way. Without getting too nosy and in your finances, how is the district addressing some of the incentives? Are you using funds that are locally, or what exactly is being used to kind of support the effort?
So to support the effort right now, it's kind of local funds. The incentives are that $2,000 and the $1,000 that we used to do. We no longer are able to do that because we just don't have that type of funding to be able to give $3,000 bonuses and anymore. So pretty much it's kind of local funds that's kind of helping us to move along with the tuition dollars that the participants put in. I forgot to mention back, even when we had the grant, I think sometimes people take for granted that if they don't pay for anything, it doesn't mean anything. So when we had the grant, the teachers paid $300 to sort of kind of have their own skin in the game, so to speak. And so because of not having that funding that we did before, we've had to increase the tuition. And right now, like I said, it's like $1,250.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Alpenfels, I see your question.
Yes, I'm just curious how many full-time personnel does Guilford County Schools dedicate to this effort?
So right now we have 4, and we have it designated for 5. One of our team members left us a couple of months ago. We got a great opportunity to go over to GTCC. So right now it's just 4 of us, and so we are in the plans of hoping to look for another coach here in the next couple of months. So the whole team altogether is 5. Myself, I'm the program administrator, and then we have 4 coaches. Right now with 3, we're hoping to get that 4th coach here soon. And our main focus is working with our teachers that go through our program. One of my jobs is I'm a program administrator, but / kind of recruiter. So I go out and try to recruit teachers, whether via a word of mouth or going to the colleges and universities. I go a lot of job fairs throughout the school year, looking for candidates to bring into our program.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And we have one final question from Mr. Eric Sanchez.
Yeah, I was wondering, I think you may have alluded to this, but I wasn't sure if there was concrete data regarding how the overall success of the program was impacted when those incentives were no longer available as a result of the grant ending.
So, after the grant ended?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the overall success?
So, yeah, whatever metrics you guys had and what was the overall impact?
I got you. So when we had the grant, we had an evaluator who did the evaluation of the incentives and overall success of the program. Since then, Dr. Flora Luke has kind of taken over the data collection of that. I don't have that right in front of me and don't remember right offhand, but there was a dip once the grant ended because of the incentives. I'm not going to necessarily say that because we didn't have the incentives, that's not the reason why we lost teachers. It was just kind of a transition of moving from, hey, we had a STEM recruiter that was funded based off the grant. Now we don't. What do we do? And coming up with new ways of going about trying to find people. And so we used some of our STEM teachers who went through the program to help us to reach out to teachers. And like I said before, we are not doing the same level as we were before with the grant, but that is one thing with Dr. Contreras is that I know we want to try to focus more on trying to find minority candidates. So that's something we're kind of trying to gear back up to get those relationships back to the way they were when we had the grant or working with the HBCUs. I hope that answers your question.
It did. If maybe later, if you can share that exact data, that might help too, as we entertain different solutions and try to replicate best practices to know how the monetary incentive played either a small or a significant role.
Okay, most definitely.
All right. Mr. Higgins, thank you again for making time to join us this afternoon. It's always great to hear from you and see you. And we will definitely be in touch with you moving forward as we continue the work of the task force.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Graham. It's always good to see you as well.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
At this time, I will now transition to our final presenter, Dr. Margarita Bianco. Dr. Bianco is an associate professor at the University of Colorado Denver's School of Education and Human Development. Her research focuses on strategies to recruit and retain teachers of color and grow your own teacher programs for high school students of color in urban and rural communities. Dr. Bianco was selected as one of the nation's top 35 women in higher education by Diverse Issues in Higher Education and recently won the Teacher Diversity Research Award from the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. Congratulations on that award. She will be presenting today about the Pathways to Teaching program, a successful Grow Your Own program that has served as an inspiration for many others around the nation, as well as here in North Carolina. Please continue to let us know through the chat feature if you have any questions for Dr. Bianco. Dr. Bianco, we're glad to have you with us. You're still on mute, Dr. Bianco. There we go.
Now you can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Graham. I appreciate this invitation. So do I have access to the slides now? Let's see.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I don't see where they are, so let's see. There we go. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here today, and I really appreciate the invitation. Given an opportunity to talk about Pathways to Teaching is always an honor. This work has really been feeding my soul in higher education for the last 11 years since we've implemented it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the program. Again, thank you for the invitation. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what Pathways to Teaching is and how it's different from some of the other programs, such as Teacher Cadet and some of the other teacher academies that have been mentioned today and that are, familiar to you around the country. I also want to say that developing this program is really informed by a number of things. It's informed by research, but it's also informed by my personal lived experience as a Latina growing up in, public schools and really experiencing some of the things that Dr. Graham mentioned in his opening statement in terms of students of color feeling like they don't belong and feeling like they don't have worth. So those were my experiences, and becoming a teacher was not something that I was ever interested in. I did become a teacher because I wanted to be the teacher that I never had. And so those experiences really informed how I developed this program. So it's a nationally recognized concurrent enrollment program. It's a grow your own program. I specifically designed it to answer the call around diversifying the teacher workforce. I wanted to develop a program specifically for students of color. Of course, all students can take the class, but it was designed for students of color. They receive college credit while they take the courses. And most importantly, the courses, and I'll talk about what they are in a minute, but all of them have a focus on social justice and equity. And that's part of the guiding, it's the guiding force throughout all of the programs, and it's really because of the research that I did to develop the program. We're also interested in increasing college readiness and also workforce readiness to prepare high school students to be paraprofessionals while they're in their undergrad programs to get their teacher license. So here, I think, is one of the ways that we're different from some of the other teacher academy type programs. We're seeking to create a new generation of equity-minded teachers, community responsive teachers who want to go back to their communities and disrupt those educational inequities that they have experienced. So when Dr. Graham mentioned that the education system is really grounded in institutional racism, we talk about this in the Pathways to Teaching program. And the goal is to create disruptors, right? I want teacher disruptors who are going to come back to the community and disrupt those systems of oppression. I also want to mention that although my work is grounded in grow your own programs, I'm also really focused on keeping our own, because I think that when we talk about recruitment, we also have to always think about retention, because the same systems of oppression that push our students of color out of school also push our teachers of color out of schools. When we talk about the national recognition that the program has received, I've been honored to be invited to various teacher diversity summits in DC. And this was a couple of years ago. And whenever I'm invited, I want to, share my privilege as a professor and bring students with me. So those two young men standing on both sides of Dr. King were students in the Pathways to Teaching program, and they co-presented with me in DC. And as Dr. Graham mentioned, I was honored to receive this award. So here are some other ways that Pathways to Teaching is different from other programs. One, it was, I developed it as a woman of color. Many of the other programs that are out there tend to be developed by white women, which is, the majority of the teacher workforce. So I think that that's important, because my perspective as a scholar of color and as a woman of color and somebody who went through the public schools is embedded throughout the program. It's also informed by research and a critical theoretical lens, which many of the other programs are not. So I spent close to 2 years reading everything that I could about why teachers of color enter the field, and I infuse that and embed all of that research in the program. So we're looking to develop future critical educators. I'm not just looking to develop more teachers, I want more critical educators. Teachers who teach the class at the high school level go through a real intense training with me for 5 days. So again, unlike some of the other programs, the teachers that I work with in schools around the country really have to understand what the guiding principles are about why we're doing this work. The other way that our program is different is once a teacher is trained and you have the program up and running in a high school, there's ongoing support for the teachers and the students all year. So we stay embedded in that classroom. I have PhD students who work with the teacher and the students all year. So we become part of that school community. And the other way, and I know that the previous presenter, Mr. Higgins, talked about the grant and losing that funding. I was really intentional from the beginning to not have this funded by a grant, because my research also showed that many of these wonderful grow your own programs last as long as the funding mechanism, and then they're gone. So my research, and looking at why teachers of color and American Indian teachers teach, it's all about that social justice and equity. It's about racial uplift. It's about, being an agent of change and a desire to be a role model. And so I took all of that and embedded it into the program so that students of color are constantly hearing how being a teacher, we're looking at the role of a teacher through a social justice lens. What's your responsibility to go back to your community and teach in your same school and disrupt those systems that kept you down. Again, so my research also, I looked at, so what do we need to do to get students of color engaged and encouraged in, to become a teacher? That focus on social justice and equity was super important. I needed opportunities to talk about race and injustice. I mean, we've got lots and lots of research around how students of color really want opportunities to talk about race and talk about how they're being profiled in the community. And yet teachers don't give them that opportunity in classrooms. They have a structured field experience where they work with younger students. They take the access and opportunities for concurrent enrollment class. And the one thing is there is no GPA requirement to take these classes, and they're concurrent enrollment. So most often you see schools offer concurrent enrollment and you have to have a GPA of 3.0. We've eliminated any barriers to taking this class. Academic rigor, current college readiness, and definitely student voice is centered throughout the program. So even though grow your own programs are often cited as, a way to address the teacher diversity gap and encourage students to become teachers, most programs have a GPA requirement of 3.0. Most programs also have a traditional white Eurocentric curriculum, and they're not informed by any critical theoretical lens, and few of them are really concurrent enrollment. So if we want something different, we really have to do something different, and we have to stop that. So I tried to take all of those things that we knew that other programs were doing, and how can we do something different? So like I said, there's no GPA requirement. The curriculum is focused on equity and justice. Student voices, theoretically, we look at critical race theory, critical pedagogy, socio-political development theory, and we introduce students to these theoretical frameworks. There are 3 courses in the program, but most schools opt to do the first one, which is year-long, and then bring these in a few years later. So it's Introduction to Socially Just Education. That's a year-long program for 11th or 12th graders. And then we also have a Frameworks for Understanding Disabilities course, which is like an introduction to special ed, and a multilingual learners course. And those 3 courses together, if students take them, they can take them within 2 years. They can be issued a paraprofessional certificate. So then what I do is I work with the districts and the HR folks and see if we can create a preferential hire so that those students can work as paras while they're in their undergraduate program. Again, going back to my own experience, I needed to work as a para when I graduated so that I had money for college. So knowing that so many students need to work, this was an important step for the program. We've got programs throughout Colorado. Minnesota has been a huge partner. I think we've got about 7 high schools in Minnesota, Rochester, New York. Nashville we had up until this year, but we might be reinstating it next year. And we just completed our first year at Asheville High School, which turned out to be a great success. 10 years, no grant. One of the, it's a hallmark of the program. It was intentional that I didn't seek funding, even though it's a very fundable program. It requires partnership. So also, as Mr. Higgins talked about, everybody's got to have skin in the game, because then we're all invested in making sure that this is successful. So you have to have that university partnership with a teacher prep program. The school district leadership really has to be on board, high school leadership, and then the elementary school leadership, so that we can all work together and we each contribute financially and we contribute human resources to make sure that we're all invested in the success of the students in the program. So here's just an example of how some districts do it. For a while, Denver Public Schools was paying the students' tuition for the concurrent enrollment. So I negotiated with my university to really bring the tuition down to what the community colleges were charging, which is $60 a credit. So the school district paid the tuition and bought the textbooks and paid for the teacher training. The high school level contributes the teacher's FTE. supports campus visits and the field experience materials. And at the university level, it's really important that they contribute to either faculty release times, that there's a faculty, or to pay for PhD students or grad students to help be mentors to the high school students. Here are some sample publications, and I think I'm under my time, so I want to give everybody their attention, and we have time for some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bianco. You're actually ahead of time, so fantastic job.
Good, okay.
I will ask Mr. Leroy Ray, and then we'll follow that up with Dr. Eads for the questions that they've presented in the chat area. Mr. Ray?
I'm not sure what question I was asking. I got to move so I get better lighting here. But I know that we are part of the program for Pathways to Teaching in Asheville at UNCA. And so I have to go back up to the questions. I was asking questions throughout.
Your question was about the what does training and what does the work look like during the COVID-19 period?
Right. So what does that look like for COVID-19 when you say that you're doing one-on-one training or you're meeting with the universities and the districts? What does that look like from your end, since it seems like it's all on you to do the
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, for example, last summer I spent 7 days in Asheville meeting with folks from UNCA and also the district folks that were going to be involved in this, including the folks from the concurrent enrollment in the high school area. And so the 5-day training, it's really intense. It's like from 9 o'clock in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. However, again, I'm doing some trainings this summer, but because of COVID, I'm putting everything online. So I actually just purchased a license for a learning management system. And before this webinar and after this webinar, I'm just putting all of my materials online. And so I am going to have at least 2 trainings this summer, and it will be online. Hopefully, I prefer to do them face-to-face, so I'm hoping that I can start doing that again in the fall.
And the reason I asked that question because I am the new director of recruitment and retention for the School of Education at UNCA. So that's
okay. Great, yeah. So I will have, I will have a program. I will have a training this summer online. So feel free to reach out to me. Yep.
Dr. Eads.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate the information that's been shared so far. I'm very interested in dual enrollment information. North Carolina has a lot of dual enrollment programs and a lot of success going on. So my question, you've answered some of them. You said there's no GPA requirement for students, but you mentioned they are 11th and 12th graders. So to qualify, how do students apply and become accepted to your program? That's my first question. I have a few others.
Okay, so thanks for that question, and that's a really important one. So in terms of applying to the program, there is absolutely no enrollment criteria. So any student who's interested in taking the course or the courses can do so. In terms of recruitment, though, I think it's important to remember, if we just were encouraging students who have said they want to be teachers, then we'd have a very small class of maybe 1 or 2 students. So when we're going out looking for students, we're also looking for students that they might be leaders and they're demonstrating their leadership in inappropriate ways. We're going to recruit students who might not have any direction, but we know that they have really good energy to contribute to a program. So we're really casting a very wide net in who we bring in, but there's no requirement for them to apply. It's really the teachers going out and recruiting the students and students recruiting students.
Thank you. That's very interesting, very helpful. You mentioned a little bit about tuition. Can you tell me how those courses are paid for? It sounds like there's been some change over time.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I heard all of the question, but the tuition is being paid by either the district or the school. So students don't pay the tuition. Right now, it comes from CU Denver, the tuition cost is $180, I think, for taking the 3-credit class. But in North Carolina or in Minnesota, it depends on whatever university we're partnering with, because they're going to really determine what the cost is. But most of the universities that I'm partnering with are really keeping that concurrent enrollment tuition low so that the program can be successful.
Thank you. And my last question was about who's teaching that. And I think I understand, but just want to make sure I'm clear. The teachers of these programs, are they high school teachers or college or university teachers that receive the training and then implement the coursework?
So it's the high school teacher. So I know that there are other concurrent enrollment programs that use a model where the university has adjuncts going to the school. But given, our emphasis on really understanding a community, it was important to have the teachers from that community and from that school. So I try to work with the principal in selecting who teaches the class, because that teacher's disposition is really critical to how successful the program is going to be. So hopefully, I can impact the principal's decision in selecting the teacher, but ultimately it is the principal's decision on who teaches the class. The teacher has to meet certain requirements. For me, the requirement is that they have to be one of those teachers that all students really love. So if I ask 10 students, randomly, who has your back, I want that teacher's name to be on that list. But the state has requirements around having a master's degree in their content area. So, in Colorado, we use the Higher Learning Commission standards. I'm not sure, I think North Carolina does as well. But you have to have a master's degree or 18 credits in the content area. But yes, it's the high school teacher that teaches the class with our model.
Dr. Graham, is it okay if I jump in?
Very quickly.
All right. So, Lisa, I saw your message. We have a teacher in the high school at the city of Asheville. And so she teaches that class. However, I go into that class and teach some courses also. And then at the end, they're required to do college level work at the end for their final exam. Right. And one of those things is to put a research project, which is part of what a lot of universities do when you have to do a project, and they have to complete that to put that together. So, yes, we do have a teacher within the high school, but I support that teacher as the collegiate partnership or collaboration.
Great. Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. As you can tell, we're getting close to the end of our meeting time here. Thank you again, Dr. Bianco, for sharing the Pathways to Teaching model, and thank everyone for your inquiries relative to it. If you continue to have questions about it, I ask that you please continue to drop those inquiries in the chat area. I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to give me about 8 minutes of overtime, and I promise you we'll conclude by 4:05 p.m. Wanted to take a few moments to open the floor to task force members so we can have very abbreviated discussion here, and then we will conclude the meeting. So if there are questions, thoughts, or comments that task force members would like to make, now is the time to do so. Please remember to identify yourself when you unmute yourself. Dr. Chance Lewis, I think you had a question that you didn't get to ask, so I wanted to make sure that I captured the inquiry that you had at this moment in time.
My question was really for Dr. Bianco as well, just asking about, I know Dr. Bianco well for many years and know her program. I just wanted to see if she could just briefly highlight once students completed the program and moved on to the teacher preparation program and ultimately into the classroom, her viewpoints on how they performed as a result of that.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Lewis. Thanks for your question. So I have the distinct honor, I feel like I've died and gone to heaven, because this year I have a student from the Pathways to Teaching program who graduated from CU Boulder with her secondary license to teach English. She got hired in close to the high school where she graduated from, and she is going to be teaching the Pathways to Teaching program there. So I have the first teacher coming to the high school who's going to actually teach this program, so I'm super excited. an answer to your question very quickly, one of the hardest things I've found, and I'm always looking for partnership, is how to track students when they leave, when they graduate from high school. Because of, HIPAA laws and policy laws, schools are not sharing information. They don't even know where students are going. And so it's really hard for me to track and give you exact numbers of how many students are teachers now. But we have anecdotal data that suggests students that are out there, we're following them. Many who are paraprofessionals, we're actually in the schools with them and visit to make sure that they're doing okay. And I will be in the school with Alexis next year to teach us pathway. So we try to stay in close touch and to support the students all through the program.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or general comments or concerns that we like to express during this discussion period? Well, hearing none, I was trying to exercise my wait time as an educator, and I'm not hearing anything. So hearing none, then I will transition us toward conclusion of our meeting. Thank you all for joining us today, and especially our presenters, Dr. Heiler, Dr. Pearson, Mr. Higgins, and Dr. Bianco. Our next full group task force meeting will be on Tuesday, August the 18th from 2 o'clock p.m. to 4 o'clock p.m. In advance of that meeting, the first draft of recommendations made by the Recruitment Subcommittee. Additional information about task force members' roles in reviewing these recommendations will be sent in the weeks leading up to that meeting. Our 3 subcommittees will be meeting periodically as we continue this work. Subcommittee chairs will be reaching out soon, if they have not done so already, to schedule these additional meetings. If you are not a member of a subcommittee, there's still time to join one. If you are interested, please contact Ms. Patillo so that we can ensure that you receive information about upcoming subcommittee meetings. One final note, you will see a link to an evaluation for today's meeting through the chat feature. Please complete this evaluation to help inform how we are preparing for future meetings. At this time, is there a motion to adjourn?
Kim Evans, motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you so very much. The meeting is adjourned. The evaluation link is in the chat feature. Please do not forget to complete it. Thank you all. Take care.